I now possess all your powers. All!
Sometimes a crazy alt mode, flying, carrying all kinds of crazy weapons, just isn't enough. Some of these guys have other abilities too, sometimes verging on the supernatural. Sometimes they tie into their alt modes. Sometimes it's completely random. In this vid, I'm talking about the time Starscream got his head crushed by one bot superpower, the time Tarn tried to kill Shockwave with his superpower, the time the DJD used Trailblazer superpower to squish his own brain, and the time Optimus got dismembered by a lightsaber and flushed down the toilet.
Probably.
It's quite a long video, so get yourselves comfortable, hit like on the video, get subscribed if you aren't already, and let's kick off with a bot whose name can tear apart the day. His words, not mine. Let's kick off with Thundercracker. Complicated guy who loves humans and their soap operas and dogs, but also smushing RC into her component parts. I said it before, but there's something about this image that really disturbs me. This version of Thundercracker has the ability to create sonic booms that can deafen and disorient opponents. This ability does tie in with his alt mode, as I figure it's just an amped up version of an ability that most jets have, one that he's somehow managed to turn to an offensive advantage. At one point, it was explained that he used a Nova concussion generator, which enabled him to make these even in the vacuum of space. He was also given a body that allowed him to cross dimensions, but that's another story. He gave this ability to Megatron by giving him his power chip rectifier in the G1 EP Heavy Metal War.
Yes, give me all your power.
Megatron turned it into a kind of a beam that he fired out of his fusion cannon, which he then used to deafen and disorientate Optimus Prime, which left him open to a blast that ended the fight. Weirdly enough, Thundercracker was never actually shown using this ability himself in G1. He revealed that he was actually a secret organic lover when he used his sonic booms to try and warn this race of oinkers of an imminent Decepticon attack. Didn't really work though, they were kind of too stupid, and it ended up just bringing them out into the open to be slaughtered by the other Decepticons. Let's move on to his bro, Skywarp.
Teleport and destroy.
Who has teleportation powers, no less. He mainly uses it in combat to outmaneuver his opponents, as he did here to get behind Ironhide and blast the poor old Autobot in the back, and here to get around Bludgeon when they found themselves on opposing sides. But he's also used it against his allies, like here after an argument broke out between him and the Insecticons. But it also comes in handy when he gets in a fix, as of course it's a great way to escape when shit goes south. Also a great way to prank some squishy humies into pooping their pants. But here, he brought in Astro Train as reinforcements and potential emergency evac for the rest of his squad. He's also used it in assassination missions, where he and Blitzwing tracked down any human who'd gotten wind of their plans to use the super powerful Ultra Energon. He's also used it to zap into locations that are primed for spying and reconnaissance. He's also used it for purposes of abduction, as Garrison Blackrock found out. But before you start thinking that an ability like this would make him invincible, no,
It doesn't.
RC was somehow able to calculate his trajectory, and just happened to leave her energy sword in exactly the right spot for him to rematerialize around it.
Surprise, asshole.
Although we've seen Skywarp teleport multiple bots in one go, there is some kind of limitation here as well. Like, he can't just teleport the whole Decepticon faction. Like right here, he tried to teleport a coalition of at least 17 bots into Shockwave's base of operations. But apparently this was a real struggle for him though, and some bots got left behind. Now I don't know what kind of range he can teleport across, and I'm not sure what stops him from teleporting into the sun, or into a wall, stuff like that. But in Lil Transformers, which incidentally started out as a fan comic, his teleportation went wrong and he ended up with his head attached to an arm. Or his arm attached to his head, to be more accurate. And there are other complications too. At one point, after being injured, he wasn't able to keep himself solid. And then it got worse when in the middle of a mission he got stuck half in and half out of phase shift. So he tried to get some ore, 12 I think it was, I can't remember which ore it was, that he thought would fix him, but failed, resulting in him disappearing completely. The only way they could figure to stop this was by wiring him to the Decepticon ship, the Nemesis, which allowed them to use his abilities to remotely teleport bots from one location to another, which basically turned him into a transporter from Star Trek. And it especially sucked for him, as apparently it caused immense physical pain every time he did it. Eventually in Transformers G.I. Joe, he was eventually repaired by the EDC, but he was restored at the expense of his teleportation powers. So he agreed to work with the G.I. Joes in the hope that his ability would be restored, and it was eventually, and he used it in a key role in the fight against Unicron. Basically, the plan was for him to teleport RC and the super weapon called the Talisman inside Unicron's body. Once they were inside, he teleported in front of Thundercracker just as he was about to get stabbed through the chest, saving his fellow Seeker in the ultimate act of reconciliation. You see, Thundercracker betrayed the Decepticons earlier, and Skywarp was furious and blew his head off. So this was a nice way to patch things up. Just a 20-second interlude right here to tell you about my channel memberships. I'm still kind of getting it up and running, but there will be a bunch of cool stuff coming on there, a Discord group and whatnot. Basically, any support I get for this channel helps me to do more of this stuff and do it quicker and all that stuff. So I'd love it if you took a look. Windcharger had super magnet hands. Yeah.
You better watch out for those super magnet hands.
Basically, he could energize his arms and make them the poles of a precisely controllable electromagnet, powerful enough to levitate 10 tons of steel 700 feet away. Oddly specific statistics freak me out. So that means he can draw stuff towards him gently, like, oh, come on, or hurl them away violently, like, ah! That sounds like more fun. This electromagnetic field gets stronger the closer the object is to Windcharger, and at very close range, he can tear metallic objects to shreds. He can also use that magnetic field for detection, almost like a radar. This one time, the Autobots were tunneling under a Decepticon base, and he used this ability to track down when they'd arrived at their intended target. On Iacon, Prime used himself as bait,
you want me, don't you,
to lure a bunch of Decepticons onto a bridge and then blew it up. But luckily, old Magnet Hands here was there to catch his ass. And later, he even used this power to kind of fake a combiner. Basically, a group of Autobots disguised themselves as Stunticons, and then Windcharger magnetized them all together so that they could all come together and pretend to be Menasor. Thought that was pretty funny. Windcharger died in the 1986 movie, but he did crush Starscream's head in the novel Deadly Paradise, as well as use the ability to remove a mind control device from Grapple's head. I mean, how did he do that? He's like, oh, you seem to have a little, let me just, don't you need to know about, like, brains and stuff? Nah. Anyway, in the IDW continuity way back when Shockwave and Orion Pax were friends, Windcharger helped them in a heist steal the matrix of leadership from the corrupt Senate, because it was a bomb, long story. So he levitated them up to the Primer Basilica, past the pressure-sensitive floor, and armed guards. I mean, how else are you going to do that without magic fucking arms? You'd almost need to fly. Then when it got dropped on the ground, which would have caused it to explode, because it was a bomb, long story, guess who was on hand to save the day? Yes, Mr. Magic Hands. I love how even Prime calls him Magic Hands. Like, they go and laugh at him behind his back afterwards.
Make me sound like some kind of back alley massage parlor.
Fuckers. In the 2019 IDW continuity, he was feared for his ability, and he was tasked with taking down the nearly invincible Nova Storm. Nova Storm basically had this... Sorry, I'm just eating a sandwich. Nova Storm had this kind of special armor that let her like walk on the surface of stars and stuff. That's too much mayo on here. Armor so strong she could walk on the surface of stars and stuff. More on her in a sec. And even after Windcharger got her in his magnetic grasp, she just dragged him along behind her. But realizing that her internal circuitry might be vulnerable, he all those and then plummeted like a stone.
It was at this moment that he knew.
So let's say that you're an Autobot and you have some hulking huge Decepticon stomping towards you ready to get his kill on. He has one of these super abilities. All hope is lost, right? Well, actually, there is this one thing called an inhibitor chip that might give you a lifeline. So it was created by Wheeljack and it locks into a bot's body. They can't get it off and it continuously drains their energy, keeping them in a weakened state and nullifying them so they can't use any abilities. They can't even transform. Let's talk about SIXSHOT, a bot that I've barely mentioned on this channel, which I know is kind of criminal actually, because he definitely belongs right here. He's one of the fearsome Phase 6ers, a faction I'll definitely go into in a vid further down the line. But aside from the fact that SIXSHOT is a six-changer, a bot with 6 alternate modes, including a tank, a jet, and a wolf, which is verging on being a superpower in itself, don't you agree? In the Japanese Headmasters, he has like a shadow mode, like dark ninja powers, where he can duplicate himself for reasons, just for reasons. But while we're talking about self-duplication, there was a Decepticon called Ragnarok that could generate copies of himself, and it needed one of these multiversal entities called Heinrad, who basically is a trans tech, to come along, tell him off, tell him to stop self-duplicating,
You'll go blind!
and banish him to a lonely alternate universe. This was the only way he could stop him self-procreating himself so much that it put us all out of existence. Let's talk about Elita One real quick, who has another godlike power, the ability to stop time within a 50-foot radius around her. She used this in the Gen 1 ep titled Search for Alpha Trion, where she was used to bait Optimus into a trap. Then, after Starscream wanted to execute her in front of him, Shockwave, being Shockwave,
Wait! I have a better idea.
found a way of making it even more horrific and hung Optimus over a vat of acid so that she would have to watch him die. It was kind of a weird moment because you see them dropping Optimus into the vat of acid, then it cuts to a commercial break, and when it comes back, she's sort of letting out this weird scream that radiates out and turns every green. But anyway, as warned by Alpha Trion earlier in the episode, this ability used up all of her life force energy, and she needed to get an energon transfusion from Prime.
Not if I can help it.
Trailbreaker, or Trail Cutter as he eventually came to be known, can generate an impenetrable force field that he's used in some pretty interesting ways. He's used it as a containment field to plug holes in the hulls of spaceships, to contain flames, block enemy transmissions, protect against enemy fire, even a tidal wave once, an explosive meteorite. And he even used it to save a group of bots from the cold harshness of space, so that Cosmos could tow them away to safety. Yay! Comically though, in the Marvel continuity, he quite often got pumped, so God knows why he didn't raise his force field. It might have also stopped him from being decapitated by Storm Shadow in an exosuit right here. In the IDW continuity, when the Senate found a spark hotspot, which is like a field where sparks come into being, they thought they could give all of these new live superpowers by bombarding the site with radiation. But Trailbreaker firstly protected the site from the ship's weapons and radiation, then protected Prime as he went off to destroy the Senate ship. It turned him a very cool shade of blue. Ice Prime. Nice, Ice Prime. So yeah, after he used it to protect and maybe even levitate Prime so that all things could go kaboom, he then shook hands with Chrome Dome and had his memory wiped. I'll talk about Chrome Dome more in a few minutes. It'll all make sense then. No, it won't. Nothing makes sense here. Again, here's another example of Trailbreaker using his force field to protect a bunch of Autobots, including the humongous Omega Supreme. Like, how big can he make this force field of his? Could he protect a planet from, a certain planet-eating living superweapon? Think about that.
The answer is no.
You see, the force field seemed to be really interlinked with his own internal power source. For example, it couldn't withstand Megatron's Vampark Annihilator, which is a larger version of a weapon originally created by mad scientist Jyaxus called the Vampark Ribbon, which could drain energy from its target and then use it as ammunition. So Trailbreaker's internal energy source is obviously finite, so there is a limit to how big and how strong this thing could be. It's also been seen to be penetrated by frenzy sonic vibrations. Trailbreaker used it to block the muzzle of a cannon once, but because he was running low on energy at the time, it didn't really work, and the shock of having his force field ripped apart by the blast apparently knocked him unconscious. So it's almost as if the force field is an extension of his body. He temporarily lost his special ability when the crew of the Lost Light were mysteriously frozen in time, and he had to quickly develop another ability, the Gift of Gab, to convince the Decepticon Titan Hunters, who'd shown up looking for powerful chunks of this guy. More on them in a future vid. But Trailblazer / Cutter convinced them that he was a super powerful force field warrior who could crush their sparks with a mere thought, a mere click of his robo fingers, or a mere pucker of his robo sphincter. And it worked, because they fucked off right quick. He set it off by accident a couple of times too. In IDW 1, he kind of had this low self-esteem, so he drank a lot. And after he snuck into the medbay to find what he'd been told was the strongest booze or fuel, he accidentally tripped a silent alarm that was protecting this mysterious coffin over here, and accidentally set off what Brainstorm called a panic bubble that would last for 30 minutes, whether Trailcutter wanted it to or not. Oh, and that's annoying, some might think. He has to sit by himself in the middle of his force field, unable to move, all by himself, you might think. But actually, it would be the cause of his grisly death. So yeah, the story of Trailcutter had a horrific end, as shortly after he managed to find happiness and purpose as Director of Security aboard the Lost Light, a role that was given to him by Megatron actually, he was lured into a trap set by the DJD, the brutal Decepticon Justice Division. Basically, he and his team came to the aid of a bot in need who turned out to be Voss. And when he found this out, he couldn't help but activate his panic bubble, trapping him inside his own force field. So his buddies, thinking that he was safe for the time being with Voss outside the bubble, his fellow Autobots went to get help. But as it turned out, he was trapped inside with Kaon, one of the most sadistic Decepticons ever, who ripped Trailbreaker to pieces and pulled his brain out and crushed it against the side of the force field. The DJD, man. So as we've seen many times, no matter what happens to a Transformer's body, they can usually put them back together again, right? But the brain module this was pretty much the true death for our friend Trailbreaker, or Trailcutter. We still gotta do a video on Tarn, don't we? Although it might be part of the worst deeds of the DJD, or most evil Decepticons, it really depends what I got time for. Defensor also had a similar ability, but probably due to his size, couldn't sustain the force field for very long. Soundwave has hearing ability so strong that he can hear other bots' thoughts in what seems to be a limited form of telepathy. When he was first forged, he was nearly driven crazy by the amount of thoughts and emotions he was picking up from the bots around him. He learned to focus his powers though, and was sent to the Gyaxian Academy for advanced technology to learn not just about how to control them, but also how to use them tactically and offensively, if you know what I mean. Yeah, Decepticons, FTW. He was able to hear this explosion even though he was miles and hundreds of miles away, and create an EMP burst that disables the Joe's ships. Bumblebee suddenly started getting all these horrifying dreams and visions, including seeing himself lowered into a pit of molten steel. He was nearly driven to madness. And guess what? It was a Shockwave plan. It turned out to be another one of Shockwave's horrific schemes, where he amplified Soundwave's ability to broadcast a signal that would manipulate sleeping cybertronians into committing acts of terror. It also gave him like a deeper connection to his cassette bots, as he could feel Ravage's death at the hands of the evil Tarn extra keenly. More about Tarn later. Soundwave was able to broadcast Starscream's treacherous words to pretty much the whole of Cybertron, exposing Starscream's plan to abandon them to be devoured by Unicron, before Soundwave had his powers amped up to breach the barrier between life and death in a moment that I've spoken about, quite a few times on this channel. But it's epic. He scanned the brains of all the Dinobots to find their weaknesses, only to find they didn't really have many brains at all, and that their weaknesses are all character traits like arrogance and stupidity and just no brains.
These guys are stupid.
This dude thought that once he committed sensitive intelligence to memory, it would be safe from the Decepticons. But no, here comes Ravage! If the info's in your brain, we take in your brain. We're gonna shove you in the trunk of a jet. Wait, jets have trunks? Which would take him to get a good scanning from Soundwave and his mind scanning. I'm just glad I didn't hide it up my ass. So Starscream's spark is rumored to be immortal. How about that? And maybe that's why we so often see him as a ghost. How about that? So it was mentioned in the Beast Wars continuity somewhere that Maximal scientists were trying to recreate 0.1 percenters, these ridiculously powerful Transformers, to help in the fight against Unicron. But they messed up and accidentally created Rampage. But what they were trying to do was recreate Starscream's indestructible spark.
How about that?
In Combiner Wars, he was messing around with the Enigma of Combination and caused a blast that would have destroyed any other bot, but because of that indestructible spark, it turned him into an energy being that I think absorbed loads of power, and as such he had a number of abilities, including atomic breath, whatever you call this. But as a ghost, his main ability is possession, and he's possessed some interesting people, to be honest. I'll go into that more in a Starscream spotlight vid, which I might call Sins of Starscream. I don't know, is that dramatic enough? Next up, we need to talk about Victorian, because she has some pretty powerful gravity powers. Like, there's not much handier in battle than a bit of telekinesis, right? Being able to lift a variety of ridiculously heavy objects, as well as pinning opponents to the ground like Prime got pinned down here. She can also use them to fly, so of course in battle, she can airlift out bots in need of rapid evac, and of course, rip them to pieces. She also used these powers to change the direction of a laser blast from a satellite that was about to kill Optimus Prime. Then, as these two explained here, she bent the light around the Autobots, rendering them imperceptible to the eye, and enabling them to make their escape. At one stage, it looked like Devastator was able to push through her gravity power, but it turned out that a crystal of ore was interfering with her powers, and when the crystal was shattered, Victorian's power absolutely shredded Devastator to dust. It was thought that Victorian's ability would be able to kill Unicron himself if it was unleashed from within his body. Unfortunately, we never got to find out if that would have been the case or not, as Victorian had to fight Bludgeon's ship then Monstructor. What do you think? Personally, I find it hard to imagine. Like, shredding Devastator is one thing, but Unicron is in a different league. I think at best, Victorian gives him a bellyache or something. While we're talking about combiners, Devastator could plunge his hand into the earth and make it appear over there. Not even that far over there, but over there. Now, this is a typical G1 thing here, because, I mean, if he has extendable arms, does he really need to shove it underground? Like, he's directly in the line of sight of Warpath. It's not like there's an element of surprise here. So it'd be like, hand pops up, it's like, oh, surprise! No, it's clearly come from... I don't get this, really. Sunstorm, an evil clone of Starscream, who was created by, well, do you really need 3 guesses at this point? Was constantly exuding massive amounts of radiation. And as such, he had the power to control electromagnetic energies, which overwhelmed and overloaded a bunch of Decepticon systems, using what he referred to as his divine light. Yeah, he had a bit of a god complex. It was with these powers and that god complex that he took on Omega Supreme. Omega probably would have won a fair fight, like he absolutely nuked him with his arm cannon. But this is Starscream's evil clone we're talking about here. So he waited for Omega to take his visor off and then, well, Omega probably needs an eye dog now. He also has massive enhanced regenerative capabilities, instantly regenerating a new face after being blasted by Jetfire. In the 2019 IDW continuity, it was an artificially created exploding singularity. Wait, let me rephrase. So it was a singularity that was artificially created that exploded that gave him his powers. He was rescued, but the heat and radiation being emitted by his body was so great that no one could touch him. So he had to be kept in a tube, with Shockwave stating that if he was let out, he would contaminate the entire base with radiation. And when they finally let him out, he melted Exarchon when he made contact with him after being shot by Megatron. Before Mirage was happily creating duplicates of himself in War for Cybertron and Rise of the Beasts, holographic misdirection was the specialty of Hound, who can create some pretty large and pretty intricate illusions. In G1, he created a life-sized replica of Megatron, and again in another rep, to convince Starscream and Shockwave that Megatron had retreated.
Amazing what you can do with a little hologram.
Then he created an entire rocket fuel base to lure Megatron and his troops into a trap. He's used these things to fake his own death a bunch of times, but he can also use it to scan things, like when he scanned dinosaur skeletons, which ended up being the designs for the Dinobots. In the Japanese Unite Warriors, he could use it to scan Transformers' minds and memories and project them, including Breakdown. So he must have seen quite a bit of Knockout, if you know what I mean. He projected Metroplex in Super Robot Lifeform Transformers, and let's face it, who wouldn't find that terrifying? Anyway, after Mirage inherited the ability, it was interesting to see him lose control of his hologram when he saw the dead bodies of his fallen comrades. Like, an emotional response seems to throw it off, which I guess is to be expected, as it's not just a device that has an off switch, it's part of this guy's body. He also managed to camouflage an entire space bridge, although that nearly drained his spark. Transmutate had the ability to unleash huge amounts of energy. Firstly, an insanely powerful screech that fried any bots in the vicinity, then a sort of energy bubble that she used to slow her descent right here, and probably also to fly. Tarn, or Glitch as he was formerly known, or Damus as he was originally known, the sadistic leader of the Decepticon enforcers known as the DJD, or Decepticon Justice Division, tasked by Megatron to hunt anyone disloyal to the cause, and make an example of them, preferably in the most brutal way possible. Even after the war ended, they were like, should we stop? Do you want to stop? No. I mean, Megatron hasn't said to stop, so... well then, let's kill people. He was another extraordinarily powerful 0.1%er with the ability to shut down machinery just by touching it. And by machinery, I don't mean bots, I just mean like non-sentient stuff like turrets and fridges, I guess. At this stage, it was extremely painful for him to use. Like many of the outliers, remember that's what they called the bots with super abilities, he ended up attending the Jyaxian Academy, but the Senate found out about him and subjected him to the horrifying Imperator, the process of removing his head and hands and replacing them with generic replacements to remove all individuality from a bot. It was around here that he renamed himself Glitch and helped in Orion Pax's heist to steal the Matrix of Leadership bomb. And during these events, he accidentally jammed Skid's grappling hook by touching it. He developed his power to the point that he could deactivate vehicles from a distance, and used it to help in the defense of the hotspot I mentioned earlier, where he nullified several elite guard vehicles. Interestingly, when this group of bots had their memories wiped to hide the involvement of Autobots from the future, long story, it was said that it didn't work quite as well on Glitch because of his ability that interfered with the process. After he joined the Decepticons and took on his famous mask, his powers eventually developed to the point where he could remotely shut down machinery and other Transformers with just his voice alone. A good example is this poor unfortunate soul, a Decepticon called Black Shadow. Don't feel too sorry for him though. He did kill 3 Wreckers, then 3,000 of the 113th Battalion, then 3 billion what must have been civilians on a planet called Rigel 4. So okay, maybe he did deserve whatever these guys got in store for him. First, he got both legs ground off by Tessera, then tipped out of his chair. Probably wasn't supposed to laugh at that, but I did. After most likely being electrocuted by Kaon, then partially melted by Helix's internal smelting pool, and then, well, all that was before Tarn showed up, who put on some classic music and just started talking about stuff. And it's here that he described how he could modulate the sound of his voice so that it fell into step with the beating of the victim's heart. And then by lowering his voice, he could kind of guide the spark into slowing and eventually giving up. But because Black Shadow was a phase 6er, he didn't slip gently into that good night. Oh no, he went kablamo. And you know what? Tarn could do all this shit over the phone too. At one point, when they were hunting Shockwave down, Tarn started to talk him to death over the radio, slowly paralyzing him one limb at a time before planning to eventually snuff out his spark. But Shockwave managed to retain enough of his faculty to shoot the radio and cut off the transmission. And Tarn did it again when he pre-recorded a message and gave it to Nickel, who could play it to paralyze anyone who threatened her. For example, Scorponok, who tried to kill her, got frozen by Tarn's voice so Nickel could escape. Deathsaurus thought he found a way around this by disabling his audio receptors. La 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 la. But again, Tarn got the last because he had Kaon hack some frequency that broadcasts directly to all the Decepticons' brains. Before Sunder became a serial killer and cannibal, he was a renowned Nemosurgeon, which is basically a doctor that can go into other bots' minds and edit out memories, which they need because of all of the horrific shit they see. What made him the best Nemosurgeon in the business was his ability to perform remote Nemosurgery, accessing Cybertronians' minds from a distance and sometimes without them even knowing. I guess that's why he had a satellite dish on his forehead. He'd find out your worst fears and nightmares and then use them against you, and that would make you extra tasty when he feasted upon your cortex and your bits and pieces and... Ugh. When he teamed up with Getaway, who tried to use Sunder's powers to control the crew of the Lost Light, he trapped Thunderclash in a loop of his own memories, and generally altered the memories of the rest of the crew to keep them in check and stop them realizing what a prick Getaway was. We are talking about rewriting the memories of 200 bots here. Later, his powers of control evolved to be able to trigger a bot's transformation, but jumbling up the sequence of transformation, essentially making them forget how to transform, so they would in effect turn themselves inside out and then roll themselves up into a little ball, which according to Freud right here, is quite literally the most painful thing a transformer can endure. He lost the powers when he tried to probe the mind of the Grand Architect, the bot that introduced the concept of transformation to the Cybertronian race. Also turned Cybertron into a god gun. Check out my weapons video for that. Infinitus was an ancient Titan Master who served as the head of Sentinel Prime at one point in the 2005 IDW continuity. He was millions of years old, and at some point had developed the ability to slow down time, which came in particularly handy for making precision strikes and shots during the chaos of a battle. Right, where were we? Skids had a super learning superpower, allowing him to assimilate vast amounts of information in incredibly short spaces of time and not only pick up new skills, but quickly become an expert at them. He learned how to disable the barbaric mouth flower after seeing one installed only once. But unfortunately, his super smarts didn't help him see that his old friend Glitch was using him to rebuild a smelting chamber that he promptly melted down 50 prisoners right in front of Skid's eyes. As I said before, Glitch was Tarn, so evil. Nor did it help when he technically learned the martial art of Metallico, because when he put it into practice against Bludgeon, he got totally outclassed and then skewered. Like a shisha. Nor did it help him figure out that he was named after something he would clean off a toilet bowl. I did a whole video on the abilities of Unicron, and there's some pretty wild ones in there, like way beyond the laser eyes and size and all that obvious stuff. I'll link to that below. While we're talking about deities, Rung turned out to be Primus. Yeah, go figure. A pretty forgettable bot with an inexplicable alt mode turns out to be the most important transformer in all of the entirety of the lore. Cutting a long story very, very short, Primus in this continuity was the first of 5 bots who made up what was known as the Guiding Hand. One of them, Adaptus, rebelled against the others and started the God War, and blasted Primus with a huge electromagnetic blast that infected all Cybertronians with information creep that basically would cause the whole Cybertronian population to forget that Primus was anything special, including Primus himself, who retreated into obscurity and became a psychiatrist. So yeah, that's how everyone forgot that Rung was Primus. Anyway, he was the only one known, like in the universe, who could create photonic crystals, which have the unique trait of indefinitely containing light, information, and the energy of a transformer's spark. Now that was usually important, and I'm going to tell you why. Because at one stage there was a boom in hotspots and they had nowhere to put them because they couldn't keep up with the demand for Cybertronian bodies. And without these photonic crystals to store the energies in, the spark would die. Told you it was important. It turned out that the Matrix of Leadership itself was a photonic crystal, which Primus made up of several photonic crystals all welded together. And, he probably has a load of other godlike powers too. Obviously, Blur has super speed! Not sure why I said it like that. He's thought to be the fastest Cybertronian, and once ran through space, pinballing off everything in the solar system and presumably running all the way back to Cybertron. I'm not sure if that would be possible, just realistically speaking. He used his speed to carry Cybertronians to safety during Unicron's devastating planet-wide assault.
Unfortunately,
Blur wasn't fast enough to save his own life though, and died in the process. It wasn't the true death though, don't worry. We love Blur. Right, let's pick up the pace. Windblade has city speaker talents, which means that she can control titans. Monstructor can drain the life right out of people, like this guy, who flew his jet too close and suddenly aged. In the IDW movie comics, there was this bot called Fracture who could trigger tremors and small earthquakes by stomping her feet around. But it wasn't just her. She belonged to a group called the Tremorcons, made up of Caesar, Aftershock, Fracture, and Tectonics. And the Insecticons could harness electricity. I was looking for Optimus' special abilities. Obviously, he has Robo-Jesus resurrection powers. We've seen that a few times. But the one that really jumped out to me was his ability to control all of his limbs, even after they'd been totally dismembered. Yeah, at one stage in G1, he was captured by the Decepticons. And then Hook hacked him to bits with a lightsaber. But then Megatron reactivated his head, so he's able to establish like a Bluetooth connection to his limbs. It's a pretty mad ep, this one. Yeah, so first of all, you had Hook hacking him to bits with a lightsaber. Then you had Optimus's arm crawling up Megatron's leg. Then the Autobots come across an alligator in the sewers made up of Optimus parts. So wait, what? Did the Constructicons flush him? How did he get in the sewers? Soundwave connects Optimus's arm to the top of a skyscraper. And not really a reason given as to why that would be better than a machine gun turret or a missile launcher or like anything else. Then the whole thing turns into King Kong with Devastator getting shot off the top of a skyscraper. I love G1. Exarchon has an interesting one. Remember that movie Fallen with Denzel Washington? Basically, Denzel is hunting a serial killer, but it turns out to be a spirit that keeps jumping into different people's bodies. Good movie, actually. Well, Exarchon is kind of like that. He's an old Cybertronian that went missing one day, and he must have gone to supervillain summer camp or something, because when he came back, he was hell-bent on conquering all of creation, the usual supervillain stuff. Anyway, he can possess other bots' bodies, but not just one, but 3 at a time. He's gotten so used to 3 bodies that being in just one body is uncomfortable to him. But even more than that, being in just one body means that he loses his advantage because then he can be killed. If he's in multiple, obviously it's like a video game. There's no real panic until you're down to your last life, right? Interestingly, once he jumps into a body, he doesn't automatically get that person's memories. He kind of has to bullshit his way through everything, which must make it quite easy for him to be caught out. Tailgate gained super strength, and when it was found that his spark was uniquely susceptible to mutation as a result of background radiation generated by quantum travel, which made him super strong and super durable, and able to pick up the rod pod and hurl it at Sunder to stop the deranged serial killer's rampage. And of course, we have to talk about the Fallen. He has telekinesis, teleportation powers, and it's said that he can command ancient entropic and destructive arts. In the Dreamwave comics, he corroded away several Autobots' weapons into uselessness with a mere gesture, and once held Grimlock's blazing energy sword with his bare hand before unleashing a huge blast of dark energy.
I am Quintessa, the prime of life.
Let's talk about the supervillain known as the Great Deceiver, who sure had a mastery of electrical energy, throwing lightning bolts and lightning balls all over the place. She can levitate and has telekinesis. But let's think about why she's known as the Great Deceiver. On one hand, she's known as a liar, making huge claims like she created the cybertronian race. It seems like she likes messing with appearances, having the ability to give herself elaborate disguises, as we saw when she cloaked herself to look like Gemma Chan. Now, I initially thought this was some kind of pretender thing like Alice in Revenge of the Fallen, but no, it's written up as a cloak, which would lead you to believe that it's some kind of hologram. A great illusion, as long as no one pokes you in the face. She can also change the appearance of other bots, and even the character of other bots, as it was her that gave Megatron this kind of cybertronian Knights look, and even reprogrammed a bot as mentally strong as Optimus to make him obey her will. Alright, you guys, let's leave that there for now. Make sure you let me know about anything that I've missed down below, and if anyone is interested in supporting the channel, you can become a member just down below. I'm still ironing it out though, so just bear with me. But mainly, thank you so much for spending this time listening to me ramble about all kinds of shit. It really does make me feel glowy inside. And I think that by the time my next video comes out, Rise of the Beasts will be out. So if you go to see it in the theater and you see a guy in a red suit, come say hi, but approach carefully because I may or may not have taken my meds that day. Make sure you've hit like on the video, make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already, because there's going to be loads more Transformers stuff coming up on the channel. I've just started playing War for Cybertron over on my gaming channel. Forged to Fight is coming to Netflix game. And of course, there's the Fortnite crossover, so that should be hilarious. So I will see you very soon for the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and cheerio, bye!